Well, welcome back to Whole Bible Study with Taddy Noy. If you're just joining us, we've been following the dramatic unfolding of Israel's deliverance from Egypt. The plagues have culminated in the death of Egypt's firstborn, and Pharaoh has finally let the Israelites go. Exodus 13 takes place in the immediate aftermath of that moment. God begins to establish rhythms of remembrance and identity for his people. Commands about the consecration of the firstborn, the feast of the unleavened bread, and the way they will travel out of Egypt. These early commands are not just ceremonial, they're deeply tied to Israel's future identity, their theology, and their cultural memory. Let's read Exodus chapter 13 together. Exodus 13 from the NIV version. The Lord said to Moses, "Consecrate to me every firstborn male, the first offspring of every womb among the Israelites belongs to me, whether human or animal." When Moses said to the people, "Commemorate this day, the day you came out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery, because the Lord brought you out of it with a mighty hand. Eat nothing containing yeast. Today in the month of Aviv, you are leaving. When the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Hivites, and the Jebusites, the land he swore to your ancestors to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey. You are to observe this ceremony in this month. For 7 days eat bread without yeast, and on the seventh day hold a festival to the Lord. Eat unleavened bread during those 7 days, nothing with yeast in it to be seen among you, nor shall any yeast be seen anywhere within your borders. On that day tell your son, I do this because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. This observance will be for you like a sign on your hand and a reminder on your forehead that the law of the Lord is to be on your lips. For the Lord brought you out of Egypt with his mighty hand. You might keep this ordinance at the appointed time of year. You must keep this ordinance at the appointed time year after year. After the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites and gives it to you, he is as he promised on the oath to you and your ancestors. You are to give over to the Lord the first offspring of every womb. At the first, all the firstborn males of your livestock belong to the Lord. Redeem with a lamb every firstborn donkey. But if you do not redeem it, break its neck. Redeem every firstborn among your sons. In days to come, when your son asks you, what does this mean? Say to him, with a mighty hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. When Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, the Lord killed the firstborn of both people and animals in Egypt. This is why I sacrifice to the Lord the first male offspring of every womb and redeem each of my firstborn sons. And it will be like a sign on your hand and a symbol on your forehead that the Lord brought us out of Egypt with his mighty hand." When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter. For God said if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by the desert road toward the Red Sea. The Israelites went up out of Egypt, ready for battle. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him because Joseph had made the Israelites swear an oath. He had said, God will surely come to your aid, and when you must carry my bones up with you from this place. After leaving Succoth, they camped at Etham on the edge of the desert. By day, the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or night. Neither of the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people. Now for the deep dive, Exodus chapter 13. Exodus 13 opens with God commanding the Israelites to consecrate every firstborn male, both human and animal. To him, at first glance, this might seem like a mere ritual requirement, but the deeper meaning is foundational to Israel's culture, theological and historical identity. To understand this chapter fully, we have to see it through the lens of the people just beginning to learn what it means to be free. after generations of slavery and learning how to live as a people set apart. In verses 1 through 2, the Lord speaks to Moses saying, "Consecrate to me every firstborn male. This first offspring of every womb among the Israelites belongs to me." The Hebrew word used for consecrate is kadesh, meaning to set apart or to make holy. This command draws a direct line back to the 10th plague, the death of Egypt's firstborn, and becomes a symbolic reversal of that event. When Egypt's firstborn were struck down, Israel's were spared. Now God requires those spared to be set apart in remembrance and gratitude. This ritual also reaffirms God's ownership over Israel. In ancient Near Eastern cultures, firstborn sons were often seen as symbolic bearers of inheritance and continuation of lineage. By dedicating the firstborn to God, Israel is enacting a theological truth. Their future belonged to Yahweh, not Pharaoh, not family legacy, and not national autonomy. This would later develop into a system of priesthood where the Levites took the place of every firstborn in the temple service, Numbers 3:12-13. The idea of substitution is deeply embedded here. While initially the firstborn were to be offered to God, later the law allows for them to be redeemed, brought back, by offering a sacrificial payment. This would become part of every Jewish family's life, and is seen even in Luke 2 when Mary and Joseph present Jesus in the temple. The practice continues a thread that runs all the way through the biblical story. God spares, God claims, and God redeems. In verses 3 through 10, Moses instructs the people to commemorate this day, the day they came out of Egypt, with the festival of unleavened bread. This feast had already been introduced in chapter 12, but here it's reinforced with theological purpose. The bread without yeast symbolizes the haste with which they left Egypt, but more than that, it reflects the purity and intentionality of the people being set apart. Yeast, in biblical symbolism, often represents corruption or influence, both physical and spiritual. The Israelites are being told not only to remember the event of the Exodus, but to shape their culture around it. Every year for 7 days, they would eat unleavened bread and recall that their story began with God's deliverance. Anthropologically, this is where we begin to see Israel move from a collection of tribes into a cohesive cultural identity. Through ritual, memory is preserved, but more than that, identity is formed. Every year, this feast became a national retelling, a rehearsal of belonging, and an act of spiritual education. The Hebrew word zakar, to remember, carries not just the idea of mental recollection, but active participation. In other words, remembering in Hebrew culture is something you do, not just something you think. The requirement that this be told on that day to your children, in verse 8, is an early mandate for generational storytelling. Parents were not just allowed to forget and move on. They had to commemorate. They were commanded to teach the story to their children. The phrase, "With a mighty hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt," verse 9, becomes liturgical, a refrain repeated across Jewish tradition. This connects directly to the Sema in Deuteronomy 6, where Israel is told to bind the commandments on your hands and foreheads. Here in Exodus 13, we see similar language. "It shall be a sign on your hand and a reminder on your forehead," verse 9. Later, this would develop into the use of tefillin, small leather boxes containing scripture bound to the arm and forehead during prayer as a physical manifestation of this commandment. Historically, this chapter also shows us how Israel's calendar and national festivals became embedded in sacred memory. Time itself becomes a theological structure. The new month, a yearly feast, and the redemption of firstborns all shape the rhythm of life around the story of God's deliverance. In verses 11 through 16, the command about the consecration of the firstborn is expanded with reference to entering the land God promised. This shows a forward-looking faith. Even as they are just beginning their journey, God is preparing them for life in the land. The emphasis is again on substitution. Every firstborn male animal is to be sacrificed except for the donkeys, which were redeemed with a lamb or have their necks broken if not redeemed. This peculiar law has rich symbolic meaning. Donkeys were unclean animals and could not be sacrificed, yet they were valuable work animals in Israelite society. The provision for their redemption reinforces the principle that even what is unclean can be redeemed at a cost. This again echoes the Exodus experience. The Israelites were no more righteous than the Egyptians, but they were spared and redeemed because of God's grace and provision. The mention of breaking the neck of a donkey is not if a donkey is not redeemed in verse 13 reminds us that redemption is not optional. It's essential. This stark image highlights that failure to redeem leads to death. Theologically, it prepares the reader for the idea that God's redemptive work, later fulfilled in Jesus, is not just a nice idea, it's a necessary one. The narrative then shifts focus to the journey itself in verses 17 through 22. This section provides critical anthropological and theological insights. God does not lead the Israelites along the shortest path to Canaan, the route through the land of the Philistines, because he knows that they are not ready for war. This is the remarkable glimpse into the divine psychology, if you will. God is not just a deliverer, he is a shepherd who knows his people's limitations. The route through the wilderness may seem longer, but is actually more merciful. God is protecting their faith formation. This demonstrates a key biblical principle. God's timing and direction are not always efficient, but they are always wise. Sometimes the long road around is the best way for the heart. The mention of the Philistines here is also historically significant. At this point in time, which is around 13th to the 15th century BCE, the Philistines were one of the Sea People's groups of settlers who had migrated to the coastal regions of Canaan. They were heavily militarized and would become some of Israel's most persistent enemies in the time of the Judges and early monarchy. Avoiding this region wasn't just about distances, it was about avoiding the early crisis of faith. In verse 19, we encounter a powerful moment of historical continuity. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him. This brief line is rich with meaning. Back in Genesis 50:25, Joseph had made the Israelites swear to carry his bones out of Egypt when God delivered them. This act connects the Exodus to the patriarchal promises and reinforces that this moment is not random. It's the fulfillment of centuries-old faith. Carrying Joseph's bones is both a literal and symbolic act of hope. It's as if the ancestors are traveling with them, and the promise of the past is leading them into the future. Ancient burial practices were central to the identity and theology. To be buried in the land of one's ancestors was to affirm belonging and covenant. So Moses carrying Joseph's bones is not just piety, it's theology in motion. Finally, the chapter closes with two deeply symbolic verses, 21 and 22. By day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud, and by night in a pillar of fire. These are not just supernatural GPS systems. They are signs of divine presence. The cloud and fire have echoes in ancient theophany traditions, visible manifestations of what the divine in storms, fire, and cloud. In Canaanite mythology, Baal was often associated with storm clouds. Here, Yahweh reclaims those images, using them to guide his people. But unlike the capricious gods of Egypt or Canaan, Yahweh's cloud never leaves. The consistency of God's presence is underscored in verse 22. Neither the cloud by day nor the fire by night left its place in front of the people. The fire and cloud also serve liturgical and sacramental functions. Later in Exodus 40, we will see that the cloud fills the tabernacle, becoming the visible sign of God's indwelling presence. And in Acts 2, tongues of fire come to rest on the heads of believers at Pentecost, a sign that God's presence now dwells in people, not just tents or temples. Exodus 13 plants the seeds for this theological arc. Now for some closing reflections. What really stands out to me in this chapter is how God doesn't just deliver. He reshapes the way his people think, live, and remember. Every ritual, every law, every part of their journey is infused with meaning. It's not just about getting to the promised land. It's about becoming the kind of people who know how to walk with God once they get there. I love that even when the Israelites are freshly freed, God doesn't throw them into the chaos. He guides them gently. He slows down the process. He redeems even the animals. He structures their days around sacred memory. That speaks to me because I think a lot of us want instant transformation, but God is patient. He forms us in the wilderness. And I'm so moved by the fact that Moses carried Joseph's bones. It's a reminder to me that every step we take in obedience is connected to something bigger, something someone else prayed for, believed for, even if they didn't live to see it. Our faith journey is always part of a much larger story. So if this chapter stirred something inside of you, maybe something I didn't mention, I'd love to hear it in the comments. Let's keep discovering things together. Thanks for being with me on this journey today, and for sure we will see you tomorrow in the next chapter.